March 15th, 2023. A wealthy single father opened his briefcase at work and found something that wasn't supposed to be there, a homemade lunch, wrapped in brown paper with a handwritten note that made his hands tremble. What he did next didn't just change one woman's life forever. It exposed a truth about his own family he never saw coming. But the real question is, what was written in that note that made a millionaire break down in tears in front of his entire boardroom? Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. Richard Thornwell had built his empire from nothing. At 42, he stood at the helm of Thornwell Industries, a tech company worth over $300 million. His penthouse overlooked downtown Seattle. His cars filled a garage most people would mistake for a showroom, and his calendar was booked solid 3 months in advance. But none of that mattered on the morning of March 15th, 2023, when he sat alone in the back of his Mercedes, staring at a brown paper bag. His driver, Patterson, had learned years ago not to make small talk during the morning commute. Richard appreciated the silence. It gave him time to prepare for the day ahead. Conference calls with Tokyo, a presentation to potential investors, the quarterly review that would determine whether 30 employees kept their jobs or joined the unemployment line. He had exactly 17 minutes before arriving at Thornwell Tower, and he intended to use every second reviewing the financial projections on his tablet. That's when he noticed his briefcase felt heavier than usual. Richard frowned. He was meticulous about what went into that briefcase: laptop, 2 folders, a leather portfolio, nothing else. The weight distribution was off, and for a man who controlled every detail of his environment, that was unacceptable. He unlatched the brass buckles and opened it. Sitting on top of his quarterly reports was a lunch bag he'd never seen before. Not the sleek, insulated container his assistant occasionally picked up from the organic cafe on Fifth Avenue. This was different, humble, the kind of brown paper bag his own mother used to pack when he was a kid growing up in the trailer park outside Tacoma, back before the scholarships, before the startup, before he became the Richard Thornwell whose signature was worth millions. He lifted it carefully, as if it might contain something fragile. The bag crinkled in his hands, and he could feel the weight of real food inside. Not a protein bar, not a kale salad in a plastic container. Actual food, wrapped with care. A white envelope was tucked into the fold at the top. Richard glanced at Patterson, but the driver's eyes remained fixed on the road ahead. Slowly, Richard pulled out the envelope and extracted a handwritten note. The penmanship was careful, each letter formed with obvious effort by someone who didn't write in English every day. Mr. Thornwell, I know you skip breakfast. I hear your stomach growl when you leave at 6 a.m. I know you work through lunch, because I clean your office, and the food your assistant brings sits untouched until I throw it away at 8 p.m. My mother used to say that a man who doesn't eat cannot think clearly, and a man who cannot think clearly cannot take care of those who depend on him. You have many people depending on you. Your daughter, your employees, even me. I made you lunch. Please eat it. Not because you have to, but because someone cares if you do. Rosa. Richard read the note 3 times. His hands, which never trembled during multi-million-dollar negotiations, shook slightly as he held the paper. Rosa Martinez had worked in his home for almost 2 years. She arrived every Monday, Wednesday, and Friday at 9 in the morning, after he'd left for the office and after his daughter Emma had been dropped at school. She cleaned, did laundry, organized the chaos of their lives, and was gone by 3, always before either of them returned home. He'd met her exactly twice, once when the housekeeping agency introduced her, and once 6 months ago when he'd forgotten his phone and returned home to find her scrubbing the kitchen floor. She was in her 50s, he thought, maybe older, small, quiet, with graying hair pulled back in a practical bun, and eyes that seemed to notice everything while drawing no attention to themselves. She'd stood up quickly when he entered that day, apologized for being in his way, though she was exactly where she was supposed to be, and disappeared into another room. That was the extent of their relationship. He paid the agency, She cleaned his house. They existed in separate orbits that never truly intersected, except now they had. Richard opened the bag. Inside was a sandwich wrapped in wax paper, an apple, a small container of what looked like homemade soup, and cookies, actual cookies, the kind with chocolate chips that spread and melted at the edges just right. The sandwich alone told a story. This wasn't grabbed from a deli counter. Someone had sliced the bread by hand, thick uneven cuts from a real loaf. The lettuce was crisp, the tomatoes were cut into precise rounds, and when he unwrapped it slightly, he could smell roasted chicken, avocado, and something else. Cilantro maybe, lime. This had taken time, thought, care. "Patterson," Richard said quietly. "When did you put this briefcase in the car?" "Same as always, Mr. Thornwell. Retrieved it from the foyer table at 5:47 a.m. So Rosa had come to his house before her scheduled day, before dawn. She'd opened his briefcase, a violation of privacy that should have angered him, and left this. Why? The question circled his mind as the Mercedes glided through morning traffic. Patterson navigated around a delivery truck, and Richard caught his own reflection in the tinted window. When had he gotten so thin? The tailored suits hid it well, but underneath, he'd lost weight he couldn't afford to lose. His face looked sharp, angular, tired. "I hear your stomach growl when you leave at 6 a.m. How many mornings had Rosa been in his house at 6 in the morning? Her schedule said 9, but the note suggested otherwise. Had she been coming early, working longer hours than he knew, seeing parts of his life he thought were private? "I clean your office, and the food your assistant brings sits untouched until I throw it away at 8 p.m. That was true. His assistant, Jennifer, dutifully ordered lunch every day from a rotating selection of restaurants she'd researched for their nutritional value and business-appropriate presentation. The meals arrived in his office at noon. They sat on his desk, forgotten while he took calls, reviewed code, negotiated contracts. By evening, they went into the trash, half the time still sealed. He hadn't realized anyone noticed. Richard carefully rewrapped the sandwich and placed it back in the bag. The Mercedes was 3 blocks from Thornwell Tower. In 4 minutes, he'd step into a world of spreadsheets and strategy, of problems that required decisive action and clear thinking. A man who doesn't eat cannot think clearly. His phone buzzed. Jennifer, with the morning summary. "Investors arriving at 9:30, conference room B prepared. Your remarks are loaded on the teleprompter. Lunch order placed for noon. Wild salmon with quinoa and roasted vegetables. Another meal he wouldn't eat. Another reminder that his life had become a series of transactions, where even food was just another item on a checklist prepared by strangers, consumed alone or not at all. But this brown paper bag, this was something different. The Mercedes pulled up to Thornwell Tower's private entrance. Patterson came around to open the door, and Richard stepped out into the Seattle morning. With his briefcase in one hand and the lunch bag in the other, he had a choice to make. Richard's corner office occupied the entire 42nd floor of Thornwell Tower, floor to ceiling. Windows offered a panoramic view of Elliott Bay, the Olympic Mountains rising in the distance like silent sentinels. His desk, a custom piece of walnut and steel that cost more than most people's cars, sat in the center of the room, positioned so he could see both his computer screens and the city he'd conquered. He set the brown paper bag on that expensive desk, and suddenly the whole office felt different. Jennifer appeared at 8:15, exactly as scheduled, her tablet already glowing with the day's agenda. "Morning, Mr. Thornwell. The Tokyo call went well, I heard. The investor presentation is queued up and She stopped mid-sentence, staring at the lunch bag. "What's that?" "Lunch," Richard said simply, "but I already ordered your—" "Cancel it." Jennifer's fingers hovered over her tablet, confusion crossing her professionally neutral expression. In 3 years of working together, Richard had never cancelled a meal order. He never deviated from routine. All of it. Even the afternoon protein shake. All of it. She made a note. though her eyes kept drifting back to the crumpled paper bag that looked so out of place among the sleek technology and modern art. "Is there anything else you need?" "No, thank you, Jennifer." After she left, Richard sat down and pulled the bag toward him. The investor meeting started in 45 minutes. He should be reviewing projections, rehearsing key talking points, preparing for the aggressive questions that would inevitably come. Instead, he carefully unwrapped the sandwich. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. The first bite transported him somewhere unexpected. Not to a high-end restaurant or a business lunch, but to his childhood kitchen table, where his mother would make do with whatever they had, turning simple ingredients into something that felt like love on a plate. This sandwich had that same quality, not expensive, but thoughtful. Every component chosen with care. The roasted chicken was seasoned with cumin and garlic. The avocado was perfectly ripe. There was a thin layer of black beans, and yes, fresh cilantro with a squeeze of lime. Somehow Rosa had created something that was simultaneously humble and extraordinary. Richard ate slowly, a luxury he hadn't allowed himself in years. As he did, he found himself looking at the note again. "Even me." 2 words at the end of a sentence that implied something profound. Rosa depended on him. Of course she did. He paid her salary, indirectly through the housekeeping agency. But there was something in those words that suggested more than just economic dependence. There was trust, faith that he would take care of the people in his orbit, even those he barely knew. When had he become someone people depended on without knowing them at all? The soup was still warm in its container. He opened it to find a rich pozole, hominy and pork in a red chili broth that smelled like someone's grandmother's kitchen. No fancy restaurant in Seattle served pozole this authentic. This came from knowledge passed down through generations, recipes that existed in muscle memory rather than cookbooks. Richard checked his watch. 20 minutes until the investors arrived. He should stop. He should put this away and focus on the $30 million that hung in the balance of the upcoming presentation. He ate the soup instead. Each spoonful felt like an act of rebellion against the life he'd built. A life where efficiency trumped enjoyment, where calories were fuel and nothing more, where meals were scheduled obligations rather than experiences to savor. His phone buzzed with a text from his daughter. "Dad, can you pick me up after volleyball practice? Coach says 5:30, Emma." 13 years old, growing up fast in a house full of everything except time with her father. Her mother, Richard's ex-wife, Diane, had moved to Portland 3 years ago with her new husband, an artist who apparently had enough time to attend every school play and parent-teacher conference. Emma split her time between both households, but Richard suspected she preferred the chaos of Diane's cramped apartment to the sterile perfection of his penthouse. He typed back, "I'll be there." Then he added, "How about we grab dinner after?" "Your choice." 3 dots appeared immediately then. "Really? Can we go to that taco place I like?" "Absolutely." Emma sent back a string of excited emojis, and Richard realized he couldn't remember the last time he'd seen that kind of enthusiasm from her about anything involving him. Their recent conversations had been transactional. Homework completed, permission slips signed, allowance transferred. Somewhere along the way, he'd become a logistics coordinator in his daughter's life rather than a father. Jennifer's voice came through the intercom. "Mr. Thornwell, the investors are in the building." 5 minutes. Richard wrapped up what remained of the lunch and tucked it into his desk drawer. But before he closed it, he looked at Rosa's note one more time. "Please eat it. Not because you have to, but because someone cares if you do." When was the last time someone had cared about him as a person rather than as Richard Thornwell, CEO? The investors coming upstairs cared about his vision because it might make them richer. His board cared about his health because losing him would tank the stock price. Even Jennifer's concern about his schedule was professional, a reflection of her job performance, not personal investment, but Rosa, who barely knew him. had woken up early and made him lunch because she'd noticed he wasn't eating. She'd seen him as a human being who needed care, not as a titan of industry who needed management. The realization hit him harder than it should have. He stood, straightened his tie, and grabbed the presentation remote. Time to convince wealthy people to become wealthier by betting on his company. The irony wasn't lost on him. He was about to spend 2 hours discussing profit margins and market disruption while a homemade lunch from his housekeeper sat in his desk drawer, having disrupted his entire morning more effectively than any business strategy ever could. The presentation went flawlessly. Richard delivered his pitch with the confidence born from knowing every number, every projection, every potential objection before it was raised. The investors asked sharp questions. He provided sharper answers. By the time they left, handshakes firm and promises of "we'll be in touch" hanging in the air, he knew he'd secured the funding. $30 million. A victory that would have consumed his thoughts for days just yesterday. Today, all he could think about was the woman who'd packed his lunch. Jennifer appeared with the afternoon schedule. "Brilliant presentation, Mr. Thornwell." They were clearly impressed. "Now you have the quarterly review in 30 minutes, then the call with the development team at 3, followed by, Jennifer, what do you know about Rosa Martinez?" She blinked. "Your housekeeper?" "Yes, nothing really. The agency handles all that. Why?" Richard gestured to his drawer. "She made me lunch. Left it in my briefcase this morning." Jennifer's expression shifted from confusion to concern. "She accessed your briefcase?" "Mr. Thornwell, that's a serious privacy violation. I can call the agency right now and have her—" "No." The word came out sharper than he intended. "Don't call anyone. I'm asking because I realized I know nothing about the person who's been in my home 3 days a week for 2 years. Well, there's the background check on file. I could pull that if you—" "That's not what I mean." Richard leaned back in his chair. "Does she have family? Where does she live? Why does she work for a housekeeping agency instead of directly for a household?" Jennifer's fingers danced across her tablet, searching for answers that clearly weren't there. "I don't have that information. The agency just sends us her schedule and handles the payments. That's standard protocol for—" "Find out," Richard said. "But quietly. Don't go through the agency. I don't want this to seem like an investigation. How should I don't know. Figure it out." "You're resourceful." After Jennifer left, looking thoroughly confused, Richard pulled out his phone and did something he hadn't done in months. He opened his personal calendar, not the work calendar that Jennifer managed, but the private one that tracked Emma's activities, school events, things that mattered beyond quarterly earnings. Volleyball practice ended at 5:30. The taco place Emma liked was in Fremont. If they ate there, he wouldn't be home until 7:30 at the earliest, which meant he might actually see Rosa. Tomorrow was Friday, one of her scheduled days. Emma climbed into the Mercedes at 5:42, her volleyball bag smelling like sweat and teenage determination. Her hair was still damp from a quick shower, pulled into a messy ponytail that made her look younger than 13. "You're actually here," she said, buckling her seatbelt. There was surprise in her voice, but also something else. Hope, maybe, or the careful guardedness of someone who'd learned not to expect too much. "I said I would be." Richard pulled away from the curb, waving to Coach Morrison, who stood by the gym entrance. "Yeah, but you say a lot of things." Emma pulled out her phone, then seemed to think better of it and put it away. "I mean, you usually are. Eventually. Jennifer just usually picks me up when you're stuck in meetings." The comment landed like a small stone in still water, ripples spreading. Richard kept his eyes on the road. "I know I've missed some pickups. 14, Emma said quietly. "This semester, 14. She'd counted. Of course she'd counted. They drove in silence for a few blocks, the awkwardness thick between them. Richard searched for something to say, some bridge across the distance that had grown between them. When had talking to his own daughter become harder than negotiating with venture capitalists? "So," Emma ventured, "tacos?" "Tacos," Richard confirmed. "Estrella's, right?" Her face brightened. "You remembered?" He hadn't, actually. He'd searched his text history while waiting in the parking lot. But seeing her smile, he wasn't about to admit that. Of course, Estrella's occupied a narrow storefront in Fremont, wedged between a vintage clothing shop and a record store. The neon sign flickered in the early evening light, and through the windows, Richard could see families crowded around small tables. The kind of casual chaos his life had been surgically cleared of years ago. They found a table near the back. Emma ordered like she'd been there 100 times. Al pastor tacos, horchata, chips with 3 different salsas. Richard realized she probably had been here 100 times, just never with him. "Mom brings me here," Emma said, as if reading his thoughts. "Like every time I visit. She says it reminds her of this place in San Diego where she worked in college." "I didn't know your mother worked in San Diego. There's probably a lot you don't know about Mom." Emma's tone wasn't accusatory, just matter-of-fact. She dipped a chip in the green salsa. "That's where she met Marcus, actually. He was painting a mural on the building next door. Marcus, the artist, the man who had time to take Emma to taco restaurants and remember the names of her friends and show up to her volleyball games even when she sat the bench." The food arrived, and Richard took a bite of his carnitas taco. It was exceptional. Tender meat, fresh cilantro, a squeeze of lime that brightened everything. Simple ingredients prepared with obvious care and skill, just like the lunch Rosa had made. "These are really good," he said. "I know, right?" Emma was already halfway through her first taco. "Rosa told me about this place." Richard nearly dropped his food. "Rosa? Our housekeeper Rosa?" "Yeah, well, my Rosa. I don't think you really know her." Emma reached for another chip. "She picks me up sometimes when you and Jennifer are both stuck at work. She doesn't mind. Says she likes the company." "Rosa picks you up from school?" "Not officially or anything. Just when there's like emergencies or whatever." Emma studied his face. "You didn't know that?" "No." "Oh." She shifted uncomfortably. "She told me not to bother you with it. Said you had important work, and she was happy to help. Was that wrong?" "Are you mad?" "I'm not mad." Richard set down his taco, his appetite suddenly complicated. "I'm just surprised. When did this start?" Emma counted on her fingers. "Maybe 6 months ago. There was that time you were in New York for a week and Jennifer got food poisoning. Rosa offered to check on me, make sure I got to school okay. Then it just kind of became a thing. She comes early on Fridays, makes me breakfast, drops me off. Sometimes she picks me up too if you're running late. 6 months. For 6 months, his housekeeper had been essentially co-parenting his daughter, and he'd had no idea. "What do you talk about?" Richard asked. "You and Rosa." "Everything, I guess. School, volleyball. She tells me about her family back in Mexico." Emma's eyes lit up. "Did you know she has 3 kids? 2 of them are in college now. Engineering students. She's so proud of them. 3 kids. Engineering students. Basic facts about a woman who'd been caring for his home and apparently his daughter for 2 years. And he was learning them from a 13-year-old over tacos. She talks about you sometimes," Emma continued, swirling her straw in her horchata. "Rosa, I mean. She worries about you, worries about me. Yeah, she says you work too hard, that you don't eat enough, that you look tired." Emma met his eyes directly. "She's not wrong, Dad, you do look tired. Like all the time." Richard didn't know what to say to that. He took a long drink of his water, buying time. "Today she did something," he finally said. "Rosa. She made me lunch. Left it in my briefcase with a note." Emma's face broke into a genuine grin. "She did it." "Oh my God, she actually did it. You knew about this?" "I suggested it." Emma bounced slightly in her seat. "Like 2 weeks ago. I told her how you never eat and how Jennifer keeps ordering food you ignore, and Rosa got this look, you know. The one she gets when she's making plans. She asked if I thought you'd be mad if she made you something, and I said you wouldn't even notice, probably. And then she said—" Emma paused, her enthusiasm dimming slightly. "She said everyone deserves to be noticed." The words hung between them, heavy with implication. "Did you eat it?" Emma asked. "Lunch?" "Every bite." Her smile returned, brilliant and unguarded. "Was it good?" "She was so worried she'd make something you didn't like. She asked me what your favorite foods were, and I realized I didn't really know." I mean, I know you order salmon a lot, but I don't know if you actually like it or if it's just like healthy or whatever. I don't even like salmon that much, Richard admitted. Jennifer researched optimal executive nutrition plans. Emma laughed, and Richard realized how rarely he heard that sound. That's the most dad thing ever. You're eating fish you don't even like because someone researched it. The sandwich Rosa made was perfect, Richard said. The soup too. And the cookies. She makes the best cookies. Sometimes she brings them on Fridays and we have them for breakfast. Don't tell Jennifer, she'd probably have a whole thing about sugar and morning cortisol or whatever. Richard found himself smiling. Your secret's safe. They finished their meal in a more comfortable silence. The earlier tension dissolved. When the check came, Emma grabbed it before Richard could. Let me see the damage, she said, examining the total. Then she looked up at him with an expression far older than 13. Do you know how much this costs compared to one of those lunches Jennifer orders? I don't, actually. This entire meal for both of us is less than half of what one of your lunches costs. And I bet you enjoyed this more. She wasn't wrong. Richard paid the bill, tipping generously, and they walked back to the car through Fremont's quirky streets. A street musician was playing guitar on the corner, and Emma dropped a $5 bill in his case. Rosa taught me that too, she said. She says when you have enough, you should always give something to people who are trying. That trying matters more than having. In the car, as they drove back toward the penthouse, Emma turned to him. Are you going to thank her, Rosa? I don't know, Richard said honestly. I'm not even sure what to say. You could start with thank you, Emma suggested, and maybe ask her to make you lunch again. She'd like that. Knowing someone appreciated it. She comes tomorrow, doesn't she? Yeah, usually around 9. But lately she's been coming earlier. I think she likes the quiet. She says it's peaceful before the world wakes up and starts demanding things from everyone. Richard glanced at his daughter, seeing her in a new light. When had she become so observant? So thoughtful. And how had he missed it? Emma, he said carefully, thank you for telling me all this. You're welcome. She looked out the window at the city lights beginning to twinkle. Dad, can I ask you something? Anything. When's the last time you were actually happy? The question hit him like a physical force. Richard opened his mouth to answer, to say he was happy, successful, accomplished, but the words wouldn't come. Because sitting in a taco restaurant with his daughter, eating simple food and having a real conversation, had felt more like happiness than anything he'd experienced in months. Maybe years. I'm working on it, he finally said. Emma nodded, satisfied with the honesty. Good, because Rosa says happiness isn't something you achieve. It's something you choose, every single day. They drove the rest of the way home in companionable silence, and Richard found himself planning something he never thought he'd do. He was going to wake up early tomorrow, and he was going to be there when Rosa arrived. Richard's alarm went off at 5 a.m., a full hour earlier than usual. He silenced it immediately, not wanting to wake Emma, whose room was down the hall. The penthouse was dark and quiet, the city still mostly asleep below. He made coffee, actually made it himself rather than programming the automated machine the night before. The manual process felt foreign in his hands. Measuring grounds, pouring water, waiting for the brew. When had he last done something this simple? At 5:47, he was showered, dressed in jeans and a sweater instead of a suit, sitting at the kitchen island with his second cup of coffee. The penthouse looked different at this hour, softer somehow, without the harsh efficiency of daylight. Through the windows, he could see the first hints of dawn beginning to paint the sky. He wondered if this was what Rosa saw when she arrived early, if she stood at these same windows and watched the city wake up while his family slept, oblivious to her presence. The elevator chimed at 6:23. Richard's heart rate picked up. He'd imagined this moment during the sleepless hours of the night, what he'd say, how he'd approach this conversation. But now, hearing her footsteps in the foyer, all his prepared words evaporated. Rosa appeared in the kitchen doorway and froze. She was smaller than he remembered, dressed in practical clothes, with her grey hair pulled back. She carried a canvas bag over one shoulder and stopped so abruptly that the bag swung forward. nearly slipping from her grasp. Mr. Thornwell, her accent colored the words, turning them formal and uncertain. I'm sorry. I didn't know you were home. I can come back later. No, please. Richard stood, then worried that might seem aggressive and sat back down. I was hoping to see you, to talk. Rosa's eyes darted to the exit, then back to him. She looked like she was calculating escape routes. Did I do something wrong? The agency said I should. You didn't do anything wrong. He gestured to the stool across from him. Please sit unless you're uncomfortable, then I'm fine standing. Mr. Thornwell. They looked at each other across the kitchen island. An ocean of granite and misunderstanding between them. The lunch, Richard started. The one you left yesterday. Rosa's hands tightened on her bag. I shouldn't have gone through your briefcase. I know that was wrong. I just thought, the note explained, but I understand if you want to report me to the agency. Report you? No, Richard ran a hand through his hair. Why was this so difficult? He negotiated billion-dollar deals without breaking a sweat, but talking to this woman felt like trying to communicate across dimensions. I wanted to thank you. Thank me. It was the best meal I've had in years. The sandwich, the soup, the cookies, everything was perfect. He watched her expression shift from fear to confusion to something that might have been cautious pride. But more than that, the note. What you wrote. It made me realize some things. Rosa finally set down her bag and pulled out the stool across from him, though she perched on it like a bird ready to take flight at any moment. I shouldn't have said those things. About your eating, about listening to your stomach. It wasn't my place. It was exactly your place, Richard said. Someone needed to say it. Emma told me last night that you've been taking care of her, picking her up from school, making her breakfast on Fridays. She asked me not to tell you. Said you had important work. My daughter is more important than any work. The words came out with more force than he intended. I should have known. I should have been paying attention. Rosa's posture softened slightly. Mr. Thornwell, you are a good father. You work hard to give Emma everything except time, except attention. Richard stared into his coffee. Except breakfast conversations and school pickups, and he looked up at her. Why did you start coming early? The agency schedule says 9 o'clock. She was quiet for a moment, choosing her words carefully. When I first started working here, I came at 9. Did my job, left at 3, professional like the agency teaches. Her fingers traced patterns on the granite. But then one Friday I arrived and found Emma sitting in the kitchen. You had already left. She was eating cereal alone, and when I said good morning, she looked so surprised, like she'd forgotten anyone else lived here. Richard felt the words like stones in his chest. She talked to me while I cleaned, Rosa continued. About school, about her friends, about feeling invisible sometimes. And I thought of my own children when they were young, how important it was to have someone listen. So the next Friday I came a little earlier, made her breakfast. Real breakfast, eggs, toast, fruit, things that take time. You weren't paid for those hours. No. Rosa met his eyes directly for the first time. But some things you don't do for money. Mr. Thornwell, you do them because they matter. The kitchen fell silent except for the quiet hum of appliances, the distant sound of the city waking up outside. Tell me about your children, Richard said. Emma mentioned they're in college. Rosa's face transformed, worry giving way to unmistakable maternal pride. 2 in college, yes. Marco is studying electrical engineering at University of Washington. He's in his 3rd year. Gabriella is at Seattle University, civil engineering 2nd year. My youngest, Sophia, is still in high school. She wants to be a doctor. That's incredible. You must be very proud. Every day. Her smile was genuine now, the fear finally receding. Marco works 2 jobs to help with tuition. Gabriela has a scholarship, but it doesn't cover everything. Sophia studies so hard. Sometimes I find her asleep at the kitchen table at midnight, with her books still open. Richard did quick mental math. 3 kids, 2 in college, 1 planning for medical school. The cost would be astronomical. How do you manage it? The tuition, the expenses? Rosa's expression became guarded again. We manage. I work for the agency for 3 days here, 2 days at another house. I clean offices on weekends sometimes. My husband, Carlos, works construction. The kids work. We're all working, she paused. That's why I understand your work, Mr. Thornwell. I know what it means to have people depending on you. To feel like stopping means failing them, but you still found time to make your daughter breakfast. To notice when she needed someone to listen, because that's part of taking care of them too. Money alone doesn't raise children. They need presence, attention, to know that someone sees them, really sees them, even when they're struggling. Rosa's voice grew quieter. Emma is a good girl, smart, kind, but sometimes when I arrive early on Fridays, I see her looking at the elevator like she's hoping it will open and you'll come back. Like maybe you forgot something, just so she can see you before her day starts. The image crushed him. His daughter, waiting by the elevator for a glimpse of him, while he rushed off to meetings that suddenly seemed trivial by comparison. I'm making changes, Richard said. Starting now. I want to be more present. For Emma. For... He stopped himself, realizing what he'd almost said. For the people who matter. That's good, Rosa said simply. I want to pay you, Richard said. For the extra hours. For the breakfast, the school runs, all of it. No, the word was firm. If you pay me, it becomes a job. What I do for Emma, I do because I care about her. Because when I see her eating alone, I see my own children at that age, and I know how much those small moments of care matter. You can't pay someone to care, Mr. Thornwell. Either they do or they don't. Richard absorbed this, understanding that he was being offered a lesson in a language he'd forgotten how to speak. The language of human connection that couldn't be quantified in spreadsheets or measured in quarterly returns. Then, let me help another way, he said. Your kids, the tuition. What if... No! Rosa stood up, and there was dignity in her posture that made her seem taller than her small frame. I appreciate the thought, Mr. Thornwell, but my children will earn their degrees. They will know they did it themselves, with their family's support. That knowledge, that pride, it's worth more than easy money. I understand. Richard stood too. But if you ever need anything... What I need, Rosa interrupted gently, is for you to eat the lunch. I'm going to leave you on Monday. And maybe to ask Emma about her science project when you see her later. She's been working on it for weeks, and she's very proud of it. I didn't know she had a science project. Now you do. Rosa picked up her bag. I should start my work. The bathrooms need attention, and Emma will be up soon. Rosa, Richard called as she turned to leave. Thank you for everything. For caring about my daughter when I was too blind to see she needed it. Noticing I wasn't eating. For... He struggled to find words adequate to the moment. For seeing us. Really seeing us. Rosa nodded, and there was kindness in her eyes. Everyone deserves to be seen, Mr. Thornwell, even very successful people who think they don't need anyone. She disappeared down the hallway, and Richard stood alone in his expensive kitchen, surrounded by luxury that suddenly felt hollow compared to the gift this woman had given him. Not just for lunch, not just care for his daughter, but a mirror held up to his life, showing him what he'd been missing while he was too busy achieving to notice. He heard water running in the distance, Rosa beginning her work. And for the first time in years, Richard Thornwell felt like he was exactly where he needed to be. Home. 3 weeks passed before Richard made his move. 3 weeks of eating the lunches Rosa left in his briefcase, each one different, each one made with the same careful attention. 3 weeks of coming home before Emma went to bed, of asking about her science project, which won second place at the school fair, of actually sitting at the dinner table instead of eating at his desk. 3 weeks of small changes that felt monumental, but Richard had a plan that went beyond personal transformation, one that had kept him awake at night, working through logistics, making calls, pulling strings in ways he'd never done for business. It started with Jennifer's research. She'd compiled a file on Rosa Martinez that went beyond the basic background check. Addresses, employment history, family details that painted a picture of a woman who'd been working 3 jobs for the past 4 years to support her children's education. Marco, the eldest, was one semester away from graduating with his electrical engineering degree. His GPA was exceptional, but he'd had to reduce his course load twice because working 2 jobs left little time for studying. Graduation had been pushed back a full year. Gabriella was struggling differently. Her scholarship covered tuition but nothing else. She'd taken out loans for housing, books, living expenses. The debt was mounting. Sophia, the youngest, had been accepted to a prestigious pre-med summer program but couldn't afford to go. She turned it down without telling her mother, not wanting to add another burden. Richard knew all of this because he'd made it his business to know. Not through Rosa, she would never have told him, but through careful, discreet inquiry. University financial aid offices, scholarship foundations, people who owed him favors. On a Friday morning in early April, Richard arrived home at 6:15 a.m. Rosa was already there, as he knew she would be. He could smell coffee brewing and hear her humming softly in the kitchen, a habit he'd learned she had when she thought no one was listening. Mr. Thornwell, she looked up from the eggs she was preparing for Emma. You're home early again. I wanted to catch you. Before Emma woke up, he set his briefcase on the counter. I have something for you. Rosa's expression became wary. Mr. Thornwell, I told you, I know what you told me. This isn't about paying you for caring. This is about something else entirely. He opened his briefcase and pulled out 3 envelopes. These are for Marco, Gabriella, and Sophia, not from me. From the Thornwell Industries Education Foundation. I don't understand. 6 months ago, our company established a scholarship program for children of service workers, housekeepers, maintenance staff, drivers, anyone who keeps businesses and homes running while pursuing their own dreams. Richard set the envelopes on the counter between them. We received over 200 applications. Your children were among the recipients. Rosa stared at the envelopes like they might disappear if she looked away. Mr. Thornwell, I never applied for any scholarship. The agency did, on behalf of all their employees with children in college or college-bound. They didn't need individual applications, just proof of enrollment and financial need. It was a lie, a beautiful lie that Jennifer had helped him construct. The foundation was real. He'd established it with $5 million of his own money. The agency's involvement was fiction designed to preserve Rosa's dignity. I can't. Rosa's hands trembled as she reached for the envelopes, then pulled back. This is too much. Open them! With shaking fingers, Rosa opened the first envelope. Richard watched her eyes scan the letter, saw the exact moment she understood what she was reading. Her hand went to her mouth. This says Marco's remaining tuition is covered, all of it, and a stipend for living expenses so he can quit his jobs and focus on school. That's correct. The foundation believes students should study, not work themselves into exhaustion. She opened the second envelope, and tears began streaming down her face. Gabriella's loans. It says they're forgiven, paid in full, and her housing is covered for the remaining 3 years. The foundation partners with universities to reduce student debt burden. It's part of our mission. The third envelope shook in her hands. Richard could see her struggling to read through tears. Sophia, the summer program. It says she's been awarded a full scholarship, including travel and housing, and... Rosa looked up at him, her face a mixture of disbelief and something close to anguish. 4 years of undergraduate tuition and medical school. All of it. She's an exceptional student. The foundation invests in exceptional students, Mr. Thornwell. Rosa's voice broke. This is hundreds of thousands of dollars. Maybe more. This foundation, it's you. You did this. The foundation is real. It will help hundreds of students. Your children were selected based on merit. Don't lie to me. The words came out fierce through her tears. Please, I know what you're doing. This is because of Emma. Because I made you lunch. This is because your daughter Sophia stayed up until midnight, studying for a future she didn't think she could afford. Because Marco delayed his graduation to help support his family. Because Gabriella is carrying debt that will take her 20 years to repay. Richard's voice was steady, but his heart was pounding. This is because you taught me that some things matter more than money. And then I realized that sometimes money can matter a great deal when it's used to remove barriers instead of building them. Rosa sat down heavily on the kitchen stool, the envelopes clutched to her chest. I told you I didn't want charity. This isn't charity. Your children earned this. They earned it by being brilliant and hard-working and refusing to give up despite impossible odds. You earned it by raising them to be those people while working 3 jobs and still finding time to care about a lonely girl whose father was too busy to notice her. Richard moved closer, but didn't touch her, respecting the space she needed. Rosa, you told me you wanted your children to earn their degrees themselves. They will. This just means they won't have to sacrifice their health, their time, their future to do it. Why? The question came out as barely a whisper. Why would you do this for us? Because you did something far more valuable for me. You gave me my daughter back. You reminded me what it means to be human instead of just successful. Richard pulled out a 4th envelope, this one different from the others. And because I'm hoping you'll consider this, Rosa opened it with trembling hands. Inside was a formal job offer letter. Not from the housekeeping agency, but from Richard directly, family coordinator, she read aloud. What is this? A position I'm creating. Part of your job would be managing the household, yes. But more importantly, being there for Emma, making her breakfast, talking with her, being the presence she needs. The salary is 4 times what the agency pays you. Full benefits, flexible hours. And one of your primary responsibilities would be helping me administer the Education Foundation, reviewing applications, meeting with families, ensuring we're actually changing lives. Mr. Thornwell, I can't. You can quit your other jobs. You can have dinner with your family every night. You can attend Marco's graduation next month without worrying about the hours you're missing. You can watch Sophia open her acceptance letter to that summer program. Richard finally allowed himself to smile. You can stop working yourself to exhaustion and start living the life you've been building for everyone else. Rosa set down the letter and covered her face with her hands. Her shoulders shook with silent sobs, and Richard stood there uncertain until he heard footsteps behind him. Emma appeared in the doorway, still in her pajamas. She took one look at Rosa, crying, and rushed forward. What happened? What did you do? Your father, Rosa managed through tears, is either the most wonderful or the most impossible man I've ever met. Emma looked at Richard, confused, then at the envelope scattered on the counter. He watched as his daughter's quick mind put the pieces together. Her eyes widened. Dad, the Education Foundation approved scholarships for Rosa's children, and I've offered Rosa a position with our family. If she wants it. Emma threw her arms around Rosa, and Richard watched as his housekeeper, as Rosa, this remarkable woman who'd changed everything, held his daughter and cried into her hair. Is this real? Rosa asked, looking at him over Emma's shoulder. This isn't a dream. It's real. The foundation is established. The scholarships are funded. The job is yours if you want it. All of it is real. Rosa gently disentangled herself from Emma and stood. She walked around the counter until she was directly in front of Richard. Then, with a dignity that humbled him, she extended her hand. Mr. Thornwell, I accept your offer. Richard shook her hand, feeling the strength in her grip. Please, call me Richard. Not yet, Rosa said, and there was the faintest hint of a smile through her tears. Maybe after you eat your lunch for a full month without Jennifer having to remind you. Then we'll see about Richard, Emma laughed. And the sound filled the kitchen with something that had been missing from this penthouse for too long. Joy. Real, uncomplicated joy. I should call my children, Rosa said, looking at the envelopes. Marco will cry. Gabriella will probably scream. Sophia, she shook her head, fresh tears falling. Sophia will finally believe she can become a doctor. Use the office, Richard said. Take all the time you need. After Rosa left, Emma looked at her father with an expression he couldn't quite read. That was pretty amazing, Dad. It was the right thing to do. It was more than that. Emma picked up the job offer letter, scanning it. You created a whole position just so she could be part of our family. She already was part of our family. I just made it official." Emma hugged him then, fierce and sudden. "I'm proud of you," she whispered. Richard held his daughter, listening to Rosa's joyful, tear-filled voice echoing from his office as she told her children their lives had just changed forever, and thought about the brown paper bag that had started all of this, a simple lunch, a note written with care, a reminder that being seen, really seen, was the most valuable gift anyone could give. He'd been so focused on building an empire that he'd forgotten to build a life. Rosa had taught him the difference, and now, every morning when he came home before dawn to have coffee and talk with the woman who'd saved his family, Richard Thornwell understood what wealth really meant. It wasn't the penthouse or the company or the millions in the bank. It was this: connection, purpose, using what you had to lift others up, coming home to people who saw you not as a success or a failure, but simply as human. That Friday, Richard didn't go to the office until noon. He stayed home, made Emma pancakes, badly, but she ate them anyway, and sat at the kitchen table with his daughter and Rosa, listening to her plan how to tell her husband about the scholarships, about the job, about the future that had suddenly opened up before them. And when he finally left for work, he found another brown paper bag in his briefcase. Inside was a sandwich, an apple, and a note that simply said, "Thank you for seeing us too." Richard saved that note, framed it eventually, and hung it in his office where he could see it every day, a reminder that the best investments weren't measured in dollars. They were measured in moments like these. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hits the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.